Imagine a world where no children had to go to bed hungry each night. Every individual is guaranteed equal chances of success, and our nation's wealth is not concentrated in the hands of the privileged few. Good morning, judges, and say hello to a future that can become a reality when you choose our time travel plan called Closing the Gap. Now, our ultimate goal in time traveling back to the Gilded Age is to decrease the contemporary gap between the rich and poor, and we will do this by firstly empowering small businesses of the late 19th century and allowing more economic opportunity for their development, while placing restrictions on the uncontrolled growth of monopolies that took place in this era. The gap that exists today is a direct result of the big business schemes of the Gilded Age. These actions would thereby limit the ability of the rich to gain vast swaths of a specific industry's gross domestic product and increase competition and diversity in the national economic landscape. We will be focusing our efforts on the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was written by John Sherman in 1890 and it passed almost unanimously through both houses of the legislative branch. The purpose of this act was to stop monopolies from forming and undo the massive inequalities and decreasing competition that resulted henceforth. The act specified the illegality of trusts on the federal scale, but excluded the local manufacturing trusts that the defense argued were inconsequential. This is what allowed the ASR to continue operating. To gain a better understanding of how the citizens view monopolies and combinations, we will first examine these two political cartoons. Artists often use satire in their political cartoons to vividly and intensely display the public's dissatisfaction towards big business. In A Trustworthy Beast by William A. Rogers, Andrew Carnegie is seen in front of a beast that has the heads of all of the major trusts at the time, lumber, sugar, oil, etc., and is talking with an unhappy Uncle Sam who represents America. Williams is portraying how the many trusts of the age were seen as fearful monsters that continue to grow bigger and stronger in the face of the weak government legislature, which led to most of the wealth to be concentrated in a few corporations. In A Trust Giant's Point of View by Horace Taylor, Oil Lord John D. Rockefeller holds the Capitol building in the palm of his hand while examining it with a jeweler's microscope, as if the government were a diamond he could buy. Both of these cartoonists have depicted the unpopular opinion against trustees and their monopolies. By exaggerating the wealthy men's grim facial features, as well as the naivety of the government, which represents the public, they emphasize the cruel nature of these big businesses, which toy with the public's well-deserved wealth and intimidate the federal government, which cowers in the face of their power. Rockefeller, pictured as taking coins out of the Capitol as if it were a piggy bank, elaborates on the idea of monopolies not only controlling the economy, but also manipulating the government itself. These drawings also indirectly comment on the attitude towards the government's laissez-faire system, which seemed to be extremely unfavorable and only makes the power of the government seem weak and incapable of supporting the population's economic well-being. The cartoons, targeted towards middle and low-class working citizens, serve to encourage the already unpopular public opinion towards trust and to fuel the fire in those who have not yet rejected the adverse beliefs of big business. You may wonder, how were these large companies able to gain such control over their economy even after the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed? Well, Section 1 of the Sherman Antitrust Act states that any business agreement detrimental to the trade of other businesses is forbidden. This was extremely vague, and many monopolies easily escaped it. For example, the ASR claimed that they did nothing wrong because they controlled the manufacturing of sugar rather than the distribution of sugar. Because the Act did not address manufacturing in any way, the ASR got away with owning 98% of the sugar refining industry. Section 2 of the Act states that any person who tries to monopolize trade or commerce is guilty of felony. No differences were specified between people who have good intentions and people who are corrupt. This encouraged scrupulous owners to either sell their companies to corrupt businessmen or to become corrupt themselves, since they may have been punished even if they did nothing wrong. Overall, there were many possibilities not accounted for by the Sherman Antitrust Act, and numerous monopolies, especially corrupt ones, got away with their crimes. The flaws of the Sherman Antitrust Act are shown in full light during the United States v. E.C. Knight Company case. The ASR won the case by finding loopholes in the Sherman Antitrust Act. They claimed that the Sherman Antitrust Act did not apply to them because the Act only struck at quote-unquote combinations, contracts, and conspiracies to monopolize trade and commerce among the several states or with foreign nations, while the ASR's actions only quote-unquote related exclusively to the acquisition of the Philadelphia refineries and the business of sugar refining in Pennsylvania and bore no relation to commerce between the states or its foreign nations. The ASR distanced themselves further from the Antitrust Act by stating that the act only included production but not manufacturing, so the sugar refining company was free to do whatever they wanted since it was considered manufacturing. This is really clever because the ASR successfully shifted the court's attention from the restraint of interstate commerce to consideration of whether the commerce power extended to manufacturing. The ASR also claimed that since it was not their intention to affect trade, the monopoly was not their fault. During their defense, they said, quote-unquote, there was nothing in the proof to indicate any intention was to put a restraint upon trade or commerce, and the fact, as we have seen, that trade or commerce might be indirectly affected is not enough to entitle complaint to a decree. Ultimately, the court ruled in favor of the ASR, which effectively dismantled the Sherman Antitrust Act. The effects of this ruling were enormous. First off, the Sherman Antitrust Act was not used as an effective tool against big business until Northern Securities Company versus United States in 1904. During this twilight zone, from 1895 to 1904, national regulation of corporations was uncertain and haphazard. Many other manufacturing companies took advantage of the situation, and the greatest merger and consolidation movement in American history took place. For example, big companies today like the United States Steel Corporation, American Can Company, International Harvester, and Standard Oil of New Jersey can all trace their origins to this period. 200 other companies also created combinations before the end of the century, which amounted to a total of $3 billion. This compares to 1879 to 1897, where a significantly less amount of combinations were created, and the total capital added up to $1 billion. Of some 318 corporations in business in 1904, nearly 75% have been formed after 1897. To make sure none of these powerful businesses are able to take control of the economy and exploit the situation, we have created a comprehensive plan to improve history by stopping the gap between the rich and the poor from widening. To ensure the most success for our plan, we'll be sending C.J. McGarrity back to the Gilded Age, since he is a white male and therefore most respected out of our group. After stepping out of the time portal, C.J. will request an appointment with Senator John Sherman of Ohio. We have decided to persuade John Sherman of our plan because he was a leading advocate for the Antitrust Act and helped draft the document himself. He was a Republican senator whose dedication to limiting the power of monopolies manifested itself in the Antitrust Act. By posing as a small business owner of a sugar refining company in Philadelphia, C.J. will be able to establish his credibility and gain respect. After gaining Sherman's trust and attention, C.J. will go into further detail about the economic strains that he has experienced because of the growing competitors and the monopolies. With the big companies having so much control, C.J. has been struggling with operations and is close to bankruptcy because the competitors have been driving the price down. This appeals to Sherman's emotions, who will feel touched by C.J.'s story and want to offer assistance to him and other businessmen in the same situation. After reading Sherman's current draft of the Act, C.J. will offer advice to improve it. Since Sherman has never faced the types of financial struggles that C.J. has, the input will be very important because it gives Sherman a better idea of what is happening so that he can stop it with a more effective act. The most important information that C.J. shares is loopholes in the Act. With many years of experience in the business world, C.J. knows that the big companies will be able to circumvent rules in the Act due to the vague wording. Specifically, the revised Act will have to include not only production, but also manufacturing. This will prevent manufacturing companies in the future, such as the American Sugar Refining Company, from forming monopolies. The Act will also state that it is illegal to form monopolies regardless of their intention. Essentially, as long as they played a role in the restraint of the market, they are responsible and will face consequences. In addition, the Act includes both local and interstate business operations. As long as one company controls over 60% of the industry, they are subject to the Antitrust Act. With this series of progressive amendments, Sherman will plug the loopholes that resulted in United States versus U.C. Knight and set an important and unprecedented example of economic reform. To ensure that Sherman follows through with our plan, C.J. will appeal to Sherman's pride and goals as a political figure. With our new timeline, his legacy would be far more significant than it is without. His name, alongside figures such as FDR, would be associated with the concept of the Great Reformer, and the passing of this act, a landmark moment in the country's economic policy. Sherman will be unable to resist our advice since all politicians want to be successful and make a difference. Because of the original vague wording of the Sherman Antitrust Act, many companies found loopholes that allowed them to grow their monopolies and buy out smaller companies. In particular, the Trust Act was first interpreted in the Supreme Court case of United States versus East Night Company in 1895. When the East Night Company gained control of the American Sugar Refining Company, their monopoly came to rule 98% of the industry. President Cleveland ordered the government to sue the company on the basis of the act. However, the court ruled 8-1 against the government, claiming that manufacturing was a local activity and was not subject to government regulation of interstate commerce. In turn, this allowed for more monopolies to grow freely. However, with the new edits to the Sherman Antitrust Act, the court ruling would be changed in favor of the United States government. This would prevent the American Sugar Refining Company and many other manufacturing companies such as the United States Steel Corporation, American Can Company, International Harvester, and Standard Oil of New Jersey from creating combinations and ultimately monopolies. With a more equal playing field, smaller businesses will be able to grow and compete with larger companies. As a result, prices will remain low, which benefits the middle class because they have more buying options and can make the best financial decisions. The effect of forwarding a more progressive revision of the Antitrust Act would serve an important role in American economic policy. The landmark objectives in this revised act not only would push the labor movement forward nearly half a century, but it would allow for the growth of a more diverse marketplace full of better opportunities for small business owners. Brand names also become less significant. For example, owning an iPhone would no longer be the norm, as many other companies are able to compete with a mega corporation such as Apple. In addition, there are a variety of options for consumers, and communities purchase their goods from smaller local businesses instead of just multi-million-dollar companies. Currently, the uncontrolled growth of monopolies has not only given economic power to mainly the top 1% of our country, but has also allowed government leaders and politicians to be businessmen who exploit middle-class and lower-class citizens for their economic benefit through schemes such as tax cuts for the rich. This adds to a widening gap between the rich and the poor. With the revised Sherman Antitrust Act, this could potentially be avoided and put limits on the power of wealthy robber barons to infiltrate the government and abuse it to serve their own economic goals. Thanks for listening, and see you on the other side.